Interstellar travel is a debate that we can all have whether it is already here or, in fact, impossible. Leaving it up to science, as of now, this is something that is not yet attainable. However, there is still so much to learn to what science actually knows and what could actually already be going on right under our watchful eyes. Because in 1965, a government top-secret program called Serpo saw 12 astronaut-trained military personnel take a 10-month journey to an alien planet and live there for almost 13 years. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Anonymous. I am a retired employee of the U.S. government. I won't go into any great details about my past, but I was involved in a special program. November 2nd, 2005. An email was sent to Victor Martinez, the host and moderator of perhaps the largest well-known space-related email network on the internet, kickstarting a whirlwind of events of the most intriguing program in U.S. history. Roswell, New Mexico, 1947, saw the biggest, most controversial UFO event for mankind. This supposed UFO event saw the crash of an alien ship in the desert of Roswell that provided the first contact of beings from the Zeta Reticuli star system called the Ebens. During the Roswell incident, government personnel came into contact with a being who survived the crash, but saw the other 5 crew members of this ship perish. The first contact would lead into the creation of an interstellar space program that would lead into a deeper understanding of our cosmos. When Roswell occurred, the U.S. government were able to mobilize on this site in such a way that can lead people to wonder if they were already aware of such beings or technology. It is important to note that even before the Roswell crash, in 1943, a conspiracy arose out of the Philadelphia experiment. This experiment from witnesses saw a U.S. destroyer begin to glow an eerie blue-green that surrounded the hull of the ship. As the generator spun, the ship would then just utterly disappear. Could this actually be the first evidence of alien technology owned by the U.S. government? Nevertheless, led by the DIA, or Defense Intelligence Agency, this top-secret program was originally known as Project Crystal Night, now popularly known as Project Serpo. This created a team of individuals who would in turn leave their identities behind to engage in the unknown. The year 1965 brought together a group of selected personnel whose lives will be changed forever. Colonel McKeever of the United States Air Force was one of these selected individuals who arrived at Fort Leavenworth for a debriefing. Only knowing that he would be gone for 10 years, he arrived not knowing what else to expect. Arriving at the building, he was met by a cadet who guided him to his assigned room. Asking the cadet what everything was about, the cadet could only tell him that he will soon be briefed on everything upcoming. Upon entering the room, he sees 2 men whose uniform says Air Force Office of Special Investigations. Confused to their presence, since they are of law enforcement personnel, his curiosity only grows. Reaching his seat, McKeever now sees there are another 11 in the room with him. At the front was a colonel who was to brief the room on what is going to happen next. Once everyone is seated, the colonel notifies everyone and says, "What I am about to show you is above top secret, as there are only 60 people in the world who know this information, and if any of you discuss or disclose this information outside of the room, you will be charged with treason." After this was made very clear, the colonel played a video that seemed normal at first in regards to classified information, but strangely enough, after this information played, Roswell, New Mexico, 1947 flashed across the screen. After the video begins to show the layout of the land, McKeever then becomes confused because the screen now reads First Contact. The film goes on to explain how the UFO crash in Roswell did in fact occur, and then again in 1947, and then in 1949, 2 years later, another crash occurred. What McKeever did not know was that there was footage showing the wreckage, but amongst this wreckage were bodies. Confused on who may have died in this crash because McKeever only knew this crash to be weather balloons. However, as the video played further and further, McKeever would get the shock of his life because, as the grainy film began to focus, he saw something that did not look human. And here is where McKeever and the rest of the room learned that extraterrestrial life does exist. Stopping the film, the Colonel stands to notify everyone that this being is known as EB1, or Extraterrestrial Biological Entity 1. As the film reached its end, they touched on and showed footage of the 1949 crash. However, the 6 EBEs in this ship perished. EBE-1 remained on Earth for 5 years before its death in 1952. Though communication was quite difficult at first due to EBE-1's language only being through tones, the United States military were able to learn a lot of important information from him during these years, with EBE-1 being able to utilize pictures and hand signals to allow themselves to understand each other. EBE-1 disclosed that his race had been visiting the Earth for over 2,000 years, and that on this trip he was unsure as to why his craft crashed. As time passed, EB-1 and the US government were able to make a deal. The military agreed to allow EB-1 to repair his communication device to contact his home that the military called Serpo in the Zeta Reticuli system, which was 40 light years from Earth. However, upon several attempts, he never received a response. This may be due to his home planet knowing such missions could be a one-way trip. After EB-1 died in 1952, the US military still attempted for years to contact Serpo. And, with enough effort, they finally got a response back. Upon establishing contact and developing a system of understood communication, the Serpos notified the government that they wanted the bodies of the crash victims from both trips. However, upon a what's in it for you and what's in it for me situation that we all know of too well from our government today, the US government wanted more knowledge about their technology. Brokering a deal, the government was able to establish 12 individuals being able to travel to their planet, which created Project Serpo. The training for Serpo was very difficult for the chosen participants. Taken to the extremes from learning about Eben's homeworld and history, the participants were buried underground and put in isolation for long periods of time. Everyone participating were trained on their specialties, and uniquely enough, the pilots were trained on how to fly an Eben aircraft. In 1965, the Ebens did return, and they were able to retrieve the bodies at Holloman Air Force Base, and quite brazenly enough, there was footage of that landing. Upon their landing, the 12 selected crewmen were greeted by the Ebens, and they were permitted to bring whatever they needed for the journey to their home planet. Upon next movements, McKeever was able to keep a diary in which we were able to call everything brought and provided for the journey and what occurred on the home planet. The team members were brought into the ship, and they were returned to the ship that was in space waiting. Escorted to the craft they will be traveling back to their home planet on, they were shown the 12 pods with single chairs on the inside, and after everyone was fixed in, McKeever saw a light begin to blink red. Without more time to think, he began to feel lightheaded and blacked out. On this 10-month journey to the planet, the 12-member team struggled to cope as they became sick and hard to breathe. To help cope, the Ebens gave them a cloudy liquid, and after consuming, they began to feel better. Midway through their journey, after becoming familiar with the ship and the Ebens, something went awry. Passenger 308, one of the pilots, was missing, and upon further inquiry, the crew members learned that he died. After the Ebens let the human crew doctors examine the body, they learned that he died of embolism, but the Ebens wanted his body to remain quarantined. After this interaction, the remaining crew members were instructed to return to their pods, and upon coming out of the wormhole, McKeever blacked out. 6 hours later, they were provided special glasses to withstand the brightness of the planet's sun, and the first very thing McKeever noticed when they stepped outside was the heat. Seeing the planet, McKeever was able to describe what the planet reminded him of, which was Arizona or New Mexico, with it being mainly arid and dry with only a blue sky above. But a key difference of this planet is that there are two suns in the sky. With there being several thousand reported photos and videos, there was only one that got leaked, and that was of the two suns of Serpo. Being brought to the main locale of where the Ebens lived, the crew members began to see that the Ebens actually lived in a more primitive capacity, but their technology usage trumps any thought that this way of life shortens their capabilities. The Ebens were made up of 650,000 inhabitants living on this planet. The Ebens also had a 350-foot tower that allowed them to tell time. And another tough adjustment was the time of day, as the Eben day was 40 hours long, with no night. Though their beginning stage seemed to be going well, what happens next was quite eerie and perplexing. Seeing the body of crew member 308, McKeever and his team wanted his body back, but the Eben doctors would not return him. After much persistence and debate, the female Eben translator told them that they are keeping his body to study and create clones as well as hybrids. McKeever and some crew members were allowed to see the experiments they were in fact conducting, and they were brought to a room that 308's blood and organs were used. Shockingly, McKeever describes the entity, which looked Eben, but it had human hands, arms, legs, and feet. Unsure as to how they could even grow so fast, they were led back outside only to ponder what they just witnessed. Due to the confusion with Eben time, the 10-year mission ended up being 13 years. And McKeever and the team were able to learn a lot about the Ebens and their culture. After a while, it was apparent the humans were getting too much radiation from the two suns, and the heat was unbearable. They were guided more northward, which the temperature was more moderate, being at 60 to 70 degrees, and the land was more green. However, unfortunately, the Ebens could not survive well in this type of habitat. Hitting 13 years, the humans were allowed to finally go back home. However, 8 out of the 12 members returned. With 308 dying along the way, the other pilot died in a vehicle crash. The other 2 members decided to stay on Serpo, and when the remaining crew members returned to Earth, they were quarantined and then debriefed. McKeever left a 3,000-page report but passed away in 2002. Here, 3 years later, an anonymous surviving crew member would send Martinez this vital email about Project Serpo, and through provided documents, they were able to learn of the story of Project Serpo. You can still visit this published website today at projectserpo.org and learn of the vast amounts of intricate information on this. And once more, we are left with more inquiries into the vastness of space and what could actually exist in our cosmos.